Hi, everyone. This is the 50 States Highpointing podcast and YouTube channel. What started off as a project for a communications class has turned into something that I actually love doing. I have the privilege of providing the platform for people to talk about the extraordinary things they do in the outdoors. Highpointing is the challenge of reaching the highest elevation in each of the 50 states. Highpointers don't get paid for their hobby. No one is sponsored by an outdoor company, and people fit this challenge into their everyday lives that also include careers and family. I found through these interviews that people who attempt this challenge are incredible and genuinely enjoy talking about their experiences. If you consider yourself a highpointer and you want to share your story on this podcast or interview, please send me an email at 50stateshighpointingpodcast@gmail.com. It has been a pleasure speaking with every highpointer. I hope you enjoy. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 50 States Highpointing Podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and the highpointer we're speaking with today is Bruce from South Carolina. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, Bruce, why don't you start off by telling us how you got into the outdoors and where that has led you?
Sure, yeah. Well, I've always been into the outdoors ever since I was a little kid. My granddad used to take me fishing and on walks through the woods, and we would often stop and look at trees, and he'd ask me, you know what type of tree that is, and eventually I learned the basics, pine, oak, hickory. From there, I kind of just grew into wanting to learn more about nature and the natural world. My favorite books as a kid were always the field guides, like the Audubon books, the Peterson books. My favorite book, which my mom used to read me as a bedtime story, was Reptiles and Amphibians of the Carolinas and Virginia. And so both my brother and I loved that. We learned all the frogs, snakes, turtles, and would sometimes go out and try to catch them too. As far as camping goes, I went on a school trip in 10th grade. I believe it was 10th grade. And that was my first Appalachian Trail experience, as well as my first highpointing experience. We went to the Grayson Highlands in March, and it was cold.
Okay.
We had snow on the ground. One day had freezing rain, and I was in a tent with one of my buddies, and I just loved it. We did probably a 25 mile loop up to Mount Rogers, and then back down the Virginia Highlands Horse Trail, which that's a great loop if anybody is interested in doing it, because you can start and finish at the same spot, and you go through just a beautiful, beautiful scenery the entire trek. And I've since taken friends back out to that. That was in 2012. Cool. And then I went to a outdoor learning school for a quarter, and that was 11th grade. And that really taught me about backpacking. We hiked around Pisgah National Forest, and I learned a lot of the different...
Yeah, I know where that is.
You know Pisgah?
Yeah, that's in North Carolina, right?
It is, yeah. It's a huge forest.
I've spent some time there. Very
biodiverse. Sections of it are classified as a temperate deciduous rainforest because it is very rainy there. There was 11 days where I didn't even see the sun at all in the late spring. And the biodiversity there is just off the charts. A lot of it is second growth forest, and it's been allowed to regrow for the last 100 to 125 years in certain spots. And you get a lot of big trees through there, lots of wildlife, numerous trails. I mean, the Appalachian Trail goes through parts of it. The Art Loeb Trail is another famous one that goes through there. The Mountains to Sea Trail in North Carolina, that one goes through there.
Yes, that's the one that I was on.
Oh, you did the Mountains to Sea, or part of it?
I didn't do the whole thing. I just did part of it.
I've heard that the mountains to see, you should basically just stop once you get to Asheville, because it's it's not real great after Asheville. Lots of road
yeah,
walk.
I'm sure like as you approach the ocean, it gets a little cooler, but yeah. Western Carolina is my favorite part of the state.
Oh yeah, it's in my opinion. I've been to all of the lower 48, and Western North Carolina is up there with the most beautiful spots. Those would be, in my opinion, Maine, New Hampshire. That's one. Parts of northern Montana, Idaho, in the Rocky Mountains, and also the Pacific Northwest are beautiful spots. And I got to give a little bit of love to like the New Mexico desert, because it's so dry and it's so high up. It's a really unique environment there too.
Can you tell our guests a little bit about a trail that you hiked from Georgia to Maine?
Yeah. Well, where would you like me to begin?
Can you talk about the moment you realized that you wanted to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail?
If I'm being honest, there was a part of me that as soon as I did that trip in 10th grade, knew, okay, yeah, I would be really interested in just continuing on all the way up to Maine and seeing what this has.
Yeah.
I always kind of figured I would section hike it, going out for 6 months at a time. That just seemed crazy to me. I didn't think I could handle that. But where it really became real was kind of a long story. Can I go into a long story?
Of course. Yeah. So, we love that.
I'll just start with COVID. COVID was my final semester in college, happened in spring of 2020. So I said goodbye to everybody, all my college friends, a little early in March, and still had online classes and really could do whatever I wanted without any class structure. So a buddy of mine who graduated the semester before, his name's Tyler. He was working a job in some sort of lab environment, and the way it worked out, he ended up having 3 days off in a row. And with the pandemic, obviously, there was no way to entertain yourself. You just had to stay in your house and nothing to do. And he knew that I was into backpacking, and I had some gear. I had an extra sleeping bag and an extra pack. And so he was like, "Hey man, take me camping. Let's go do something." And I was like, I was overjoyed because I was looking for something to do. I was getting stir crazy, and he really took to it. I took him up to the Blue Ridge Parkway, did some of the mountains there, Black Balsam Knob, which is a beautiful place, but very, very popular. With the pandemic, it was not crowded at all, and the campsites were open, and so he really took to it, and just wanted harder and harder hikes, which I've never really had a buddy like that. I've had friends who want to go camping, but they want it to be easy. They want it to be, we're not that far from the car. We can go back to the car if there's an emergency. And he was like, no, I want to go into the wilderness areas. I want to be out there and, experience the full force of nature. And so it kind of became a pretty regular thing, maybe as often as once a month for the next year and a half or so. He and I would work it out with our schedules to go do some hikes. We did a few of the high points. I took him up to Mount Rogers. That was one of our early trips. Took him to Mount Mitchell, did the Black Mountain Crest Trail there, that was my first high point. Was it really?
Yeah.
That's a tough trail there, the Black Mountain Crest.
Yeah, it was.
We actually went on a day that the state park and the parkway were closed, and we had the summit to ourselves. It was kind of eerie in a way. There was bad weather on the parkway, and so I think there had been some blowdowns, so nobody could get up to the park, and we were able to go up there and have it to ourselves, which was a really unique experience because every other time I'd been there, it was really crowded.
Yeah, it does get crowded. And they do shut down the parts of the Blue Ridge Parkway for weather. Yeah.
This was also in February.
Yes, and it's always during winter.
Yeah. Like I said, I love winter camping. I don't have a lot of friends who are comfortable with that because something about spending the night out in 20-degree weather just doesn't seem to appeal to people.
I mean, if you don't have a good equipment, it could be an unfortunate experience. But I think when you're prepared, it can be a lot of fun.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a little bit of suffering through the night, but once you get going, it's totally fine. It's honestly better in my opinion because you don't sweat, you don't have bugs.
Oh yeah, especially out there, it's the bugs that are the real benefit in the winter. And yeah, you suffer a little bit, especially when you just set everything up and you get in and it's like, okay, I'm not warm right away. But when you get there, when you get warm, you're like, okay, this is actually pretty cool. And then, I don't know, are you able to start a fire out there, or is that?
I'm not a fire guy. I mean, when I get to camp, I'm not looking to do extra hiking, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And yeah. There are issues with leave no trace and making fires. When we were, oftentimes when I'm on hikes and I see like illegal fire pits that someone's obviously made poorly, right? Usually I'll go and chuck the rocks into the woods and spread it out because if there are allowed to be fires at the campsite, there's only supposed to be one fire pit typically. Yeah. Also going to gather the wood, you trample plants and it's just, it's just better to let the wood naturally decompose the way it should, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, there'd be a lot less forest fires out this way if that were the case.
That too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I narrowly missed a couple of forest fires on trail. I was just past the Smokies when there was a wildfire there, on my shakedown.
Oh, that's right. They did. Yeah.
Yeah. That was last year.
Okay.
And then, on my shakedown hike in the Roan Highlands, I went up there, and a couple days after my shakedown hike, the Roan Highlands caught fire, which that's not a state high point, but it's a Southern Sixer, which is another challenge that I think would be good for some of the, North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, Virginia. That
is a cool challenge.
It is, yeah, and you can do them all in relatively short order if you set your mind to it. Not like the state high points where it takes years.
Yeah, it's a long-term project.
Yeah.
So you and your friend, did your friend who you go camping with, did he do the AT with you?
Yeah, so that's how it happened. I had left my job. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do, but I knew I didn't want to work there anymore. I had a good bit of money saved up. And so we were still going on our hikes. This was the end of 2021. And I think we had done Klingman's Dome. We'd done it.
In Tennessee.
Yeah. I had only driven up it before. And so one thing that I was doing with him was we were trying to find the most difficult route up some of these high points. And we found a trail that was on that highway 441 way down at the base, like closer to Gatlinburg. And we found a way to go up that and then link up with the AT and go do Klingman's and then come back. And
Cool.
I had kind of mentioned as like an offhand comment, there's some crazy folks that hike this whole trail from Georgia to Maine. And I never really thought, even at that point, I never really thought I would ever do the whole thing in one go. Still kind of thinking I'll do section hikes. But that must have resonated with him, because a couple months later, he had started talking about doing the whole trail. And I looked at him, I was like, man, no, you're crazy. Like, the weather's so bad and it's so hard on your body.
Yeah.
There's so many factors. And I thought there's no way. But then we were on a hike, I think in December, and that was in a mountain range called the Plot Balsams. It's another 6,000 foot range. We had meant to go to Mount LeConte, which is the other side of Clingman's Dome, right next to Clingman's Dome. But a tree had fallen. There was a bad thunderstorm, knocked trees down, so we couldn't go there. Alternate plan, and we hiked. We left the trailhead at like 10 p.m. and did probably 5 miles of night hiking through some incredibly muddy, steep, dense forest terrain. And
it's good training, I guess, for your future endeavor.
Absolutely. And so we get into the tent, and the temperature's probably dropped. It's probably 1 a.m. And it's probably around 20, maybe getting into the teens that night. And, I look at him and I'm like, you know what? We can do the AT. Like, it's not going to be any worse than what we've done tonight. And so that was December-ish. For the next 2 months, we planned our hike and did a couple more shakedown hikes, and we left on February 27th of 2022.
Cool.
He and I, we had intended to go all the way together, but he ended up getting sick from a restaurant that I won't name, but it's right before you get to the Smokies. And we had the same meal, which is strange. Same meal, same drink, and he got sick. I didn't. And he was in the hotel room in pain, and he tells me, man, don't wait for me. Just go on, because I'm not hiking today, and I'm probably not hiking tomorrow, and I know you want to go. And so I did. I went on ahead, and he and I kept in touch the whole trail, checking in, seeing where each other were. I was trying my best to hold myself back, but I really couldn't. There were days where I just felt good and I had to go. And every time I checked in with him, it was like he was a little bit further behind. And so we kind of just figured, okay, we'll do this separately. He's the reason why I even thought about starting the trail as a full through hike. And he would say the same thing about me for getting him into backpacking and teaching him all the principles of leave no trace and how to be safe out in the woods and how to plan your hike and find your trail and everything like that. So we did split up. He finished about 3 weeks after me.
Oh, cool. Yeah. That was my question. I was like, how does it end? Does he finish?
He did. He finished.
That's a good ending.
Yeah. And actually, after I finished, I was kind of texting him. I was like, hey, how you doing? And he was like, man, I'm pretty tired. I think I'm going to stay at this hostel another night. And I was like, oh, what hostel? He's like, the Human Nature Hostel in Maine. Great hostel, by the way. If for whatever reason you find yourself going to Maine on the trail. It's right near the trail in Andover, Maine. Or if you're going up to Katahdin and you would like to not spend money on a hotel room and go to a hostel, this hostel's great. They feed you all 3 meals and they give you a bunk in the bunk room for pretty cheap. I mean, it was like $60 for one person to have a bunk and 3 meals, which you can't beat that. And it was good food too. So can't speak highly enough about that hostel. But,
yeah.
Oh, I knew where it was, and I found out where he was, and I surprised him there after I had finished.
Oh, cool.
My way back south, I kind of made a little goodbye tour and said hey to some friends who I'd left behind, including my friend Tyler. And
did you walk back or did you have a car there?
That's called a yo-yo. If you're especially crazy, there are people who start in Georgia, go to Maine, and walk back to Georgia, which if I had another, if I had a like another $5,000 and my feet weren't beat up, then I think I really would have considered it. But no, I had a friend pick me up and I was driving back.
Cool. Okay. Just had to make sure.
Yeah. There was a guy who did that this year named Da Vinci, and I met him at a campsite in New York where it's actually not a campsite. It was like a spiritual life center. And I don't know exactly what it was. But I think they had like a church there where people lived there, like full-time priests were living there, and it's right next to the trail. They let hikers camp there. And I met this guy named Da Vinci he carried mouse traps. Da Vinci carried mouse traps the entire length of the trail because, to be fair, the mice are.
There's a lot of mice, I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the hostels.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, wherever there's food. So.
Yeah, especially at the shelters that are more easily accessible.
That's what I meant. Shelters, not hostels.
Well, some of the hostels had them too. Not going to name names, but I mean, some of the hostels had mice too. But the shelters that are near roads that are more easily accessible, there was usually evidence of mice. A mouse actually gave birth in one of my friend's packs. Like, yeah, he woke up in the morning, and he finds 3 little baby mice in the bottom of his pack.
So, just one more question about this yo-yo thing. Did the seasons line up? Can you go back to Georgia and the season's okay? The weather, I mean.
Oh yeah. Da Vinci spent some very cold nights in Pennsylvania and Virginia.
The
seasons do line up. But I spent some cold nights in, the whole trail, really. I had one night in New Hampshire where I had sent back my winter gear. I was in a 40-degree sleeping bag, and my only jacket was a rain jacket because I'd been experiencing 90, 95-degree weather with 100% humidity. Well, a random cold snap comes through, and fortunately, I was only at 3,000 feet. I was a couple days before Mount Washington. But at 3,000 feet in the Smarts Mountain cabin, it got down to 37 degrees. The wind was brutal. It was alternating between rain and just a driving mist. And fortunately, there's an old fire warden's cabin up on Smarts Mountain. And I think I paced it out in the morning. I think I figured it was about 12 feet by 16 feet. We had 10 people in that little space.
Wow. So you warmed up pretty quick.
Yeah, it definitely helped to have bodies. We even had one hammocker having his hammock from the roof, just because we were like, dude, if you go out there with this wind basically blowing the mist sideways, you're going to wait. I mean, your entire setup is going to get soaked, and you're not going to sleep.
Yeah.
You probably won't die, but you're not going to sleep. And so we convinced him to stay with us and stay in the hammock inside. Another hammocker didn't hang his hammock, and we just gave him all our extra sit pads and clothes and stuff so that he could have a mat on the floor, because 37 degrees with 20-mile-an-hour winds and mist / rain is that can be pretty dangerous conditions.
Yeah, especially when you're wet.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was also June 18th, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow, you didn't see that coming.
No, I was so. I mean, I was shocked by it, and I'm just grateful that I was in the early part of New Hampshire before I get up to the high elevations, because actually that day, a person did pass away from hypothermia that they sustained on not on Mount Washington, but they were trying to do a presidential traverse, and they were one mountain over from Washington, because they had figured they would do it all. They would go up and come down in the same day, but the wind chill was around 0. There was ice. I can't imagine what the winds were. I mean, they had to have been 50 miles an hour plus. Those sorts of things happen up there in New Hampshire. Like, the weather's just crazy.
Well, you hear about record-setting weather conditions up there, and it surprises people because it's not the Rocky Mountains. It's not the Cascades or something.
Yeah.
But that is a very serious mountain.
Washington's the deadliest mountain in North America. If you could look up the list of casualties there. I think it's close to 200.
I think the best training that you can get on Mount Washington is enduring the weather conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can change at the drop of a hat. The tricky thing about Washington is you can have a beautiful sunshiny day. It can be 75 degrees down around sea level at the base, but that mountain is 6,000 feet up. It's higher. It's 1,000 feet higher than Denver. Like the weather on Washington is totally different than the surrounding regions. The day after I did Washington, I had a pretty nice day in the afternoon, but I got up to the top of a mountain and I looked back at Washington, and it was socked in completely. And I talked to some people, some Thru-Hikers who were on it that day. They were okay. There are huts up there, like European style mountain huts that have, they have a bunk room, they have a kitchen, they have staff that's there. And so you're able to go into those for refuge, but they were talking like it was not safe to be outside. I mean, no visibility, totally sucked in, windy, mist, rain. And I was standing on another mountain 2,000 feet lower, but same range, 20 miles away. And it was totally fine. It was a sunshiny 60-degree day.
And this was in June still.
I believe the day I was on Washington, it was late June.
So how was your summit on Washington?
I was so lucky.
It sounds like
65 degrees, sunshine, and 5-mile-an-hour winds.
That's perfect.
In fact, I was actually able to play wiffle ball up at the top.
Wow. What a contrast to the next day.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's unpredictable. And I'm sure some of the high pointers have seen this sign, but it's a big yellow sign, and it says, it's like, warning, the weather on this mountain is incredibly unpredictable. People have died of hypothermia even in the summer. Turn around now if the weather is poor. Something to that effect. I know it says even in the summer, because it's no joke. I mean, you have to take that mountain seriously. Experienced mountaineers have met their fate on that mountain, even in the summer. I actually did a presidential traverse wall on trail. Some of the New Englanders will know what a Prezi traverse is, but basically, that day I woke up on one side of Washington, and then you have Pierce, Eisenhower, Monroe, which are all 4,000 foot peaks. Then you go do Washington in the middle, and then you have Jefferson, Adams, Madison. And some of those are a little bit off trail, so I had to take a side trail, not the AT. But if you do all of those in a day, it's a presidential traverse, and it's, even with like 1,800 miles under my belt, that was probably the toughest 16 miles of hiking that I did on trail. It was a tough day. Yeah.
So along the AT, then you did which state high points?
Yes. So can I give you a little story about what I did at each of them?
Yeah.
So the first one you see is Clingman's Dome. That is also the highest point on the trail. It's pretty much on trail. You don't have to take a side trail to it. I mean, I think it's maybe 100 feet off trail. That one, I camped at the shelter just before it, maybe two miles before Clingman's. And then I woke up early, went up there for sunrise with my friends Harmony and Buddha. And we got up there before sunrise, and we watched it rise. And
that's cool.
It was very cold, because this was also, I believe this was also on the spring equinox. If I'm not mistaken, that was March 21st. And the wind was blowing. It's still dark, and I had my hands out of my gloves because I was trying to take pictures of the sunset, and I couldn't feel my hands. It was worth it. It was totally worth it, but it was rough on my hands. That one's popular. A lot of thru-hikers will do that because they'll either try to go up there for sunrise and camp at the shelter just before it, or there is a shelter maybe 3 or 4 miles after it, and catch sunset and then go hike through the dark to that next shelter, because you do have to camp at shelters in the Smokies.
So there's no like backcountry camping?
Well, there are, but on the Appalachian Trail, there's no backcountry sites that I remember on the Appalachian Trail. There are some off on side trails, but regardless, you still have to camp at the designated backcountry sites and designated shelters. Yeah. And oddly enough, thru-hikers have to give priority to the weekenders because they have reservations for the shelters. That never happened to me because I was there so early. But it had the shelter filled up, then the thru-hikers would have had to be the first to go pitch their tents outside of the shelter.
It's very interesting because they have a long way to go after that.
Right? You would think it would be the opposite.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Then the second one you come up to is Mount Rogers. This was my 4th time going up Rogers. It's about half a mile off of the Appalachian Trail. If you've done Rogers, you have to hike the Appalachian Trail. I don't know that there's a route up it that circumvents the AT. But the day I went up was the day after a foot of snow. So I had stayed, I'd done something a little weird. I hiked about 12 miles outside of Damascus, Virginia, had a friend pick me up, take me back into town, and then drop me off the next morning, or actually 2 days later after the snowstorm, and the snow had started to melt at the low elevations, but when I got up to the top of Rogers, it was like a foot deep of snow. And so that was beautiful. The snow had mostly been packed down, so it wasn't too bad. Okay. I mean, my feet got soaked that day just because of all the melting snow, but it was worth it to go up and see Rogers in winter conditions. And that one I also with Buddha. Buddha was still with me at the time.
Okay. And so just for the listeners, the people who hike, Thru-Hike, or maybe not Thru-Hike, I don't know, but people who hike the Appalachian Trail give themselves a trail name. And Bruce's trail name was Martian. So when he talks about Buddha and, other friends along the trail, those are not their names given at birth. Those are the names given at the trail.
Yes. Interestingly, my friend Tyler never took a trail name. He was Tyler the entire way.
Really? Why is that?
He just never wanted one. Combined with being a little bit early, he kind of got into a gap where he wasn't quite up with me, where I had met a group, but he was still ahead of the bubble, what's called the bubble.
Okay.
Which it's good. You typically don't want to be in the bubble, especially at the beginning, because you're competing for shelter spots. You're competing for tent sites. You're competing for resources in the towns sometimes. Sometimes the little small town grocery store will sell out of all the ramen noodles and there's nothing to eat.
Wow.
But
okay.
He was kind of in a void. And so partially he didn't have anyone to give him a trail name.
Sure.
But I just don't think he really wanted one. He was fine with Tyler. But most people do take a trail name. It's
And so why was yours Martian?
Sure, yeah. I'll tell you the story of that. I was sitting in a hostel in Franklin, North Carolina. There was a snowstorm. It was a -9-degree wind chill out on the next mountain that I was going to have to go over, Waiaw Bald. And so I wasn't going to go hiking that. I booked 3 nights in a hostel, and then I was sitting in there talking with some people, and I didn't have a trail name yet, obviously. I was talking about the native rhododendron that grow in North Carolina, and that's one of my passions is plants, and particularly rhododendron I find quite fascinating. So I was talking to Buddha again. He was there, and then another guy named Turtle, and I was just talking about the rhododendron and other plants. And Turtle goes, "You should go by either Watley or The Martian, like the movie The Martian, where with Matt Damon, where he goes to Mars and he's a botanist / engineer, and he has to basically engineer a greenhouse so he can grow potatoes." And so it kind of tied back into my love of plants, and I liked the name Martian, and so I stuck with it.
I would not have guessed that as your story, so that's fun.
No, it's a little surprising.
Yes. When people hear that, my name was Martian, like you either look weird or you did something very strange, otherworldly, but didn't expect it to start with plants. So that's cool.
Right.
Back to the high points. You get done with Mount Rogers. What's next?
Then you go down to the low points of the trail. Like for about 1,000 miles, you don't really, I wouldn't say you're not climbing mountains, because you are, and you do have some mountains, but you don't go over 5,000 feet again until you get to the presidentials in New Hampshire. So from Rogers is about mile 500, Mount Washington is 1,800 something. So you've got a huge gap in there of relatively low areas, especially Northern Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Maryland, West Virginia. Forgot about those two. I've got a story about Maryland and West Virginia.
What is it?
I did something called the 4-State Challenge. I do not recommend this. This is not a good idea. Only do this if you're really stupid and you're okay with being in pain for at least a day, probably a few days after that. But basically,
love a story that starts off with a good disclaimer like
yes, please don't do this if you care about your health or having a good time. Basically, myself and 5 others in my Tramily decided that we wanted to hike through 4 different states all in the same day. And this is a fairly well-known challenge among thru-hikers. You go to the West Virginia border, which we did. We spent a day in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, and then we actually walked backwards 3 miles. So I've got a negative 3-mile day in my trail log. And we camp out at the West Virginia border and get up 2:30 in the morning, out of camp a little after 3, and we start hiking, and we go across the border. West Virginia's maybe 4 or 5 miles or so. Most of that is walking through Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, which is a great town to visit, by the way. If you're on a state high pointing trip and you're trying to knock out the West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, take a little detour to Harper's Ferry. Lots of history there, and it's a very pretty town too. But we walk through there and at like 4 in the morning, go into Maryland. It's then 40 miles through Maryland, and then we finish at the Mason-Dixon line in Pennsylvania at this park called Penmar Park. The first 25 miles were great. I did 25 miles before lunch. A friend of one of my Tramily met us there and brought us some sandwiches and some sodas and some watermelon. And then I got back going after lunch. I felt great for another 10 miles. And then the last 10 miles just killed me. I mean, I was hurting. And there's a really steep, maybe it's not so steep, but it felt steep to me at the time, hill right at the end. I mean, maybe mile 42 or something. And then you have to go down this boulder field on the other side for about a quarter mile or half a mile. And that I was moving at a snail's pace by that point. And so I did a 45-mile day from Virginia through West Virginia, through Maryland to Pennsylvania. And then I took 3 days off.
Yeah. I mean, isn't the average day on the Appalachian Trail like 25 miles?
Well, that's high.
Okay.
On days where I hiked, especially once I had my trail legs and once I was going, 25-mile day was pretty usual, depending on what the terrain was like. And I mean, through Pennsylvania, it was like, let's do 25, 28, 30, 32. Those were pretty normal days through there. But in the beginning, obviously you don't have trail legs yet. You shouldn't try that even if you can. And then at the end for a northbounder, you shouldn't do 25 miles through New Hampshire and southern Maine.
No.
And even parts of Vermont are kind of tough too, but New Hampshire and southern Maine, like I know some people who did do 25-mile days in there, but there's a rough stretch where it gets tough to do much more than 15 miles in a day for most people.
So after Mount Rogers, then you had your 4 states in a day hike.
Yes.
And then what was your next high point?
So after Rogers, I went to Highpointer, New Jersey, which is maybe a quarter mile, half a mile off the trail. Really wasn't much to that day. I knew I wanted to go. I convinced one of my friends to come up and take my picture. Her name's Boomerang. She did the 4-state challenge with me as well. With one of the 6 of us who did it, and finished together. Great person. But yeah, we went up to High Point. We went down. We were trying to beat some weather and get to a shelter called the Secret Shelter, which actually had a donkey. Believe it or not, there was a shelter that was a kind of private sort of deal. It was on a farm, but welcomed all Thru-Hikers, and there was a donkey.
Because why not?
Why not? Yeah, got some great pictures. His name was Jake the donkey.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Oh, even the donkeys have their trail names.
Right. He was really old too. They said he was like 35 or older. Really old.
Wow.
But yeah,
I guess meeting all the Thru-Hikers keeps them young.
I guess so. I'm not sure how long a donkey is supposed to live, but so you hit Greylock, and Greylock, I have an interesting story. Somewhat interesting. I don't know. I mean, every day on trail was interesting, to be honest.
Yeah.
Very, very few boring days, even when the scenery was kind of redundant and flat and no views. There was still the people make it interesting.
Of course.
So Greylock, I was with my Tramily. We were called the Peacocks, by the way. We should mention that.
So for the listeners, and I just learned this, the Tramily is the trail family.
Yes.
And then now the Tramilies have names.
Yes. Not always, but usually, because it helps to know, oh, that group is coming. And so we were the Peacocks.
Sure.
And
all right.
I'll tell you about how we got our name. We had actually seen a peacock on trail in Pennsylvania. And this one guy in our Tramily, Teddy Bear, was making the peacock noise. They make a yeah kind of sound.
Yes, they do.
And so there was a guy there at that campsite as we were all trying to make the sound. There was this guy there. He was a little bit of an oddball. His trail name was Hellraiser, so it should tell you everything you need to know.
Sure.
And he goes, "Y'all sound like a bunch of peacocks." And we all kind of looked at each other and we were like, "Yeah, that's it." That's our name. And it fit our Tramily really well. So yeah, Greylock Day, we left the town of Pittsfield, Massachusetts. I was a little bit behind leaving that day because there was just torrential downpour, and I'm kind of a fair weather hiker, especially knowing my abilities, knowing, okay, I can make up the miles once the rain stops. It'll just be much more fun for me to do it that way. And so I hung out in town with my buddy Skywalker, and we hiked a bit. He was actually getting off trail to meet a friend in Cheshire, Massachusetts. And so I was way behind everybody that day, and had to climb Greylock, which is a beautiful climb, by the way, if you take it.
I've heard, yeah.
You can drive to the top. That's how I did it my first time. But I've really gotten into trying to find more difficult ways to do these high points where it's possible. And obviously, like Britton Hill, Florida, you're probably not going to find any trails going to that unless the Florida Trail goes by it somehow. Oh
yeah, the Florida Trail. I forgot about that.
Yeah, that's one of the big 11. But so this is a really difficult hike. I mean, I wouldn't say really difficult. It's not like the hikes out in the Rockies, but you got a pretty decent elevation gain, and the terrain is not easy. For me that day, I was battling the mud and streams flowing down the trail. But once you get up high up on the ridgeline, you're in a beautiful balsam fir forest, and it's so green. There's so much moss and ferns and just so much life around you that I was really, I felt great. And the smell was just amazing up there. And so I get up I get up to Greylock, and it's late. It's maybe about an hour, maybe hour and a half till sunset. I knew everybody else was camping up at the shelter past Greylock, but I was pretty tired from taking this climb, and with how muddy the trail was, because I think it had honestly rained like over an inch, maybe 2 or 3 inches overnight. I just had to, I just had to stop. And there's actually a warming hut that may or may not say for emergency use only, but I ducked in there and just cooked dinner and was trying to wait to decide whether I was going to go on or not. And I eventually settled on staying up on Greylock and in that warming hut the night and getting out early in the morning. Greylock was beautiful though. After dinner, I went up or actually this was before dinner. Before I decided to stay in the warming hut, I went up the tower, and I don't like heights at all. Like I know this sounds weird because I go climb all these mountains. Mountains don't bother me one bit. Like, I guess I trust the earth to not move, but towers just bother me. And there's a spiral staircase all the way up. And so,
oh yeah, that's intimidating.
Yeah, I'm white knuckling the rail going all the way up, but I get up there, and for that moment that day, the clouds kind of parted and I had a great view of the valleys below. And I think you can see into New York. I think you can definitely see into Vermont. I think you can also see into Connecticut on a good day. And so I did, that's my Greylock story. I got up to the top of Greylock, and I was just beat from the day, with how muddy it was and how late it was. I considered it an emergency, and I needed to stay the night in that warming hut. By myself.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to define emergency, and nobody knew what you had just been through. So
right, and obviously, no one would ever know I was there. I practiced leave no trace. I was going to be out before anybody would possibly be there in the morning, and left everything the way I found it. It's actually a historical hut. It was built by the CCC a long time ago in the 30s. Worth checking out.
For the listeners who don't know, the CCC is the Civilian Conservation Corps, and they built a lot of structures in protected lands now that we know, that are pretty symbolic.
Yeah, they did some great work. A handful of shelters were built by them. Some other monuments. Really great work.
Wow. So can you talk about Katahdin as a high point and also as a very symbolic peak at the end of your trail?
Yeah. I get goosebumps just thinking about it.
I'm sure.
It's really a beautiful mountain, because actually, for about 50 or so miles before that, there's nothing. There are no mountains. You might have to climb a small hill a few hundred feet, but there's nothing. And so you get a ton of views of Katahdin, and every little minute it's getting a little bit closer, and you know you're going to get there. And so you're not worried about getting there anymore. And instead, you kind of don't want to go. Like, oddly enough, you don't, like, I really felt a strong sense of like, I don't want to go, but all of my friends were going, so I'm going to go. But it's like, that mountain, that's the end. you're never going to be in that exact situation again once you get up to the top of that.
And that was your life for 6 months, was on that trail.
Yeah. It is, and it felt so much longer. I mean, 2022 was the longest year of my life. I feel like I spent, it honestly feels like I spent a whole year out on the trail, like maybe longer.
Wow.
Every day, some days it felt like multiple days in one day, like a week could pass, but it's only a single day. And so, getting to Katahdin, it's a huge milestone, and knowing that's the finish and knowing what you've accomplished, that mountain means a lot. It's bittersweet, honestly. Like I didn't really know how to feel once I got to the top. I mean, I was really happy that I had done it, but a big part of me was kind of a little bit sad. I mean, some people cried. Some people cried when they got there. I mean, we gave each other hugs. We had, our Tramily was pretty big, and we had about 10 people with us that day. We actually all stopped once you get up to the summit block of Katahdin. For those of you who haven't climbed it, the hardest part of the climb, I think it's about a 5-mile hike. The hardest part of the climb is like mile 2 to mile 4. The last mile and a half is pretty flat. I mean, it's uphill, but it's pretty easy. So we all did that hard part of the climb, and then we waited there because we wanted to finish together, and we wanted it to be all of us. And so we hiked in a line of 10 people, and we were all carrying. Cool. We didn't leave our packs at the bottom. We wanted to carry our packs to the top. I mean, they've come that far. We need to bring it.
Yeah, right.
And it's kind of, it's weird. Some people know what you're doing, and so they're like, wow, you are, I mean, first of all, did you walk here from Georgia? That's incredible. Like, they know it, and they give you high fives and they praise you. And then other people, I don't think they don't realize what you're doing, and they look at you kind of funny. Like, why are you carrying that big backpack up there? You're not allowed to camp up there. What are you doing?
They think you packed all of that just for that hike.
Yeah, right. It's more symbolic because I wanted my pack to go to the top. I wanted the challenge too, and I'm not going to have another challenge. Yeah. It's a beautiful mountain, and that one, I had actually done it previously. So I'd done all these high points previously prior to being on trail, which I was okay with most of it. But when I got to Katahdin, I kind of wish I hadn't done that one before.
I see. Yeah.
And
so that it could be a unique experience then in your mind.
Right. I knew what I was expecting. I'd already gotten a picture with the sign, but I didn't climb on the sign. I feel like when I was up there, I just wanted a picture beside the sign because I still kind of, even at that point, I still knew prior to having done the trail, I still knew that sign was really special. And, I didn't want to go climb the sign, not having hiked the whole approach trail to that. But I almost made it exactly to the day 3 years after my first summit of Katahdin. It would have been kind of unique or kind of just a strange coincidence. But when I climbed Katahdin at the end of the trail, our planned date was actually July 19th. We looked at the weather once we were a few days out, and July 19th was not a good day to do it. So we went the day earlier, and what that actually forced us to do was I had to do another 30-mile day in the 100-mile wilderness. And then we stopped at Able Bridge, and we couldn't go to the Birches campsite, which is the one that's at the base of Katahdin. It's reserved for thru-hikers, particularly nobos who are finishing the trail, stay at the Birches. But we had like 7 or 8 of us that were wanting to stay there. And the shelter, I think it might hold 12. So we ended up
and then for the listeners who don't know, Nobo is someone who is hiking northbound Georgia to Maine. Yes. And I'm assuming Sobo is southbound Maine to Georgia.
Correct. Nobo is north, right. Sobo south. And then there's also flip-floppers who typically start at Harper's Ferry, although you could technically start anywhere. Start at Harper's Ferry, hike to Maine, go back to Harper's Ferry, hike to Georgia. Just based on time requirements, some people choose to do it that way. But yeah, so nobos typically stay at the Birches campsite. It's at the base of Katahdin. It makes your hike 5 miles up, 5 miles down. You stay in Baxter State Park, and that's the typical way to do it. We couldn't do that, so fittingly, we had to do an extra 10 miles, making our final day a 20-mile day, because why wouldn't it be? We'd done, I mean, dozens of them. I mean, probably 50 plus 20-mile days before that. So why not finish it off with one?
You'll never forget that high point for sure.
Definitely not.
And I'm going to guess that you don't want to do it again, that high point. You want that high point to remain as a memory of finishing the AT.
There's a couple reasons that I would go back to Katahdin. I would most likely not do it as just, I'm going to day hike Katahdin and come back down. That doesn't make any sense. If I were doing another thru hike, I think I would like to go do Sobo. And so I would like to go do the Knife's Edge up over Katahdin and then start my thru hike that way. That seems like a fun way to do it. Also, if I were meeting someone who is finishing the trail or starting the trail, but if I were meeting someone finishing the trail, I would go hike Katahdin to meet them. Totally.
For sure.
I'm sure there's people in the high pointing community who are familiar with the New England 67 challenge, where you try to do it's kind of an extension of the New Hampshire 48. They're 4,000 foot mountains. There are 67 of them in New England, and I believe that includes 14 of them in Maine. And there's Katahdin, but there's also Hamlin Peak and North Brother, which are also in the park. And Hamlin Peak is pretty close to Katahdin. I even looked at it and I thought about going to do it that day. But I was pretty tired and
you're already busy,
ready to celebrate. So if I were going to do it again, I might do Katahdin in conjunction with that, but preferably it would be on another thru hike that I do Katahdin.
So when you tell people, maybe friends from college or other people who might not be into the outdoors as much, that you thru hiked the AT, you did these high points, what do they say?
Well, I'll start with the AT, because everyone knows what the Appalachian Trail is. It's probably the most famous trail in the world, except maybe some of the Caminos, like the Caminos over in Spain.
Camino de Santiago.
That's the one everybody everybody knows. That one might be more famous internationally, but at least in America, everyone knows the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah.
One of the first questions I get is the whole thing. Like they don't realize that you can do the whole thing in one go. That surprises people. They've heard of people, oh yeah, I went to hike the Appalachian Trail for a weekend. And
yeah, right.
That's the usual way of looking at it. But I'm like, yeah, the whole thing. And they're pretty impressed. And a lot of people are like, oh, I'd love to do it one day. And I mean, my first thing to tell them is you can. You'd be surprised how flexible a lot of employers actually are, especially in the current hiring climate where there is a shortage of workers. And if you tell your employer, like, hey, I have to go do this, a lot of people were actually able to negotiate a way with their employer to say, hey, let me take 6 months unpaid leave and go hike the trail. Additionally, you can just quit your job and go do it.
That is always an option.
Like those are the hardest parts, is just starting. Starting it's the hardest part, because once you're out there and once you've accepted, I'm out here, I'm in whatever weather that comes my way, I am hiking these miles. It doesn't matter whether it's uphill, downhill, mud, river crossings, I'm hiking it. It becomes really, really easy. Like you just have to do one thing. How many people can say they only have one thing on their to-do list for today, and that's just walk north? It really is doable once you accept it.
Yeah.
And like for me, that happened maybe about 3 or 4 weeks in. There was pretty much no doubt in my mind that I was gonna go all the way to Maine. So back to the questions people ask. The one I get all the time is, did you carry a gun? No, no, I didn't carry a gun.
I'm surprised you get asked that.
Yeah, it might be because I'm from the South, and it's a very gun friendly people around here, and a lot of people just think, if I'm going to be out in the woods, there are things out there that could harm you. I'm going to have a gun. But realistically, no one carries a gun.
There's so many people everywhere. It's like animals don't come up to these big crowds of people like people
Exactly, yeah. Like the only animal that you should be afraid of hiking the Appalachian Trail is ticks. Like that's it. Lyme disease is probably the most deadly animal-borne ailment on trail. Occasionally a bear attack happens. Occasionally someone gets a disease from rodents. But there's no need to carry a gun. There's so many people out there, and it's actually really special because almost every person you meet out there is just a really genuine, down-to-earth person who isn't going to mean you any harm. They usually want to help you. The trail kind of filters out anybody who isn't supposed to be out there. So, like, I can only think of 3 instances where I didn't want to be around a person the whole trail.
So what do they say when you tell them about different high points?
Most people, I guess, don't know what it is. First of all, a few people who hike mountains are like, wow, that's a lot, actually. And to have done mountains in such a diverse range of states is a little bit unusual, because most people, when they climb mountains, they're climbing mountains that are easy for them to access. They're climbing the ones in their home state. And so doing the high points is a little bit unusual. Not that many people know about it, from what I can tell.
Yeah, and it's a very intentional endeavor. You don't just stumble upon a high point in a hike. Well, I mean, if you're doing the AT, you will inevitably stumble upon a high point or two. But, apart from that, you do have to very intentionally plan these
Yeah,
things.
I guess I haven't mentioned how many high points I've done. I don't know if that's important.
How many have you done?
Well, I'm kind of stuck at 40. I had my
that's not bad.
No, it's not, but I've got the tough ones left. So
yeah,
I really got into it in college, and summer breaks I had flexible jobs that would let me take off a week and go knock out a bunch. I mean, people know about doing them in little bursts.
Cool.
And so I would go knock out like 4 or 5 in a week and then drive back. I got all the ones. I kind of did it intentionally. It's like, okay, I'll go do a little bit further than I went last time. And so I've got everything east of the Mississippi, and then all the Great Plains states, and then Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico done as well. I attempted Utah, but I got altitude sickness. Kind of poor judgment on my part. I drove from my house, which is basically sea level. I think I'm at like 200 feet or so. I drove from there to the trailhead in about 36 hours with 2 people. It was like 30 hours of driving in a day and a half. And then instead of, I really should have camped at the trailhead and hung out, but instead I hiked in to, I think it's called Dollar Lake, and camped out there that night through a thunderstorm, which that should have been my sign to turn around. And then I tried to go up it the next day, but I was only able to walk like 50 feet at a time and then catch my breath. And so I got maybe a mile from the top, and I saw I could make it to the top. I knew I could make it to the top, but the route I took, I was going to have to go back down and then back up to Gunsight Pass. And that was the part that I wasn't sure if I went to the top that I could make it back through that, because I was really hurting. And I'm a pretty athletic person. I'm a pretty fit hiker. That was just, my body was not ready to be at 13,000 feet in like 48 hours.
Yeah, in such a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So is it safe to say your favorite high point is Katahdin?
Ooh, no. I think I'm going to say no on that one.
Okay.
I feel like I gotta go with Mount Rogers, which
all right.
A lot of people just won't understand it. I understand. I know it doesn't have the views, but for me, it's just about like the hike up to Rogers is always so nice, and there's horses around or wild ponies around there. And then I'm a really big fan of that evergreen forest, that kind of boreal forest. It's a mix of Fraser fir and red spruce. I just like being in that environment. I've done Rogers 4 times, and I really like it.
Do you have any favorite documentaries, podcasts, or books that are outdoor adventure based that you would recommend to listeners?
Sure. As far as like mountaineering goes, there's this guy, what's his name? It's the 14 peaks in the Himalayas. His name's Nims Persia. Yeah. He did a great job with that documentary.
Yes, I agree.
And really, really interesting guy. I recommend everybody watch that. I think it's on Netflix, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, yeah.
Other than that, I mean, I don't really, I guess I like all the nature documentaries. It doesn't matter what.
Yeah. I know. Me too.
There's a good new one out called Our National Parks, I think. And
Yes.
I really like
yeah,
that.
I've seen that one too. Yeah,
It's
that's a good one.
Yeah.
I like when they feature national parks that may not be like the big famous ones that you always hear about, but the ones that are very unique in an ecological sense that,
Yes.
that it's not Yosemite, for example, but it's like this has this one plant or this one animal species in it. And that's why it's designated as a protected land.
Definitely. Yeah. I like those. I like those as well. Really kind of part of my reason for liking Rogers, because it's a really unique habitat there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some really good national parks that aren't well known, but they have very rare ecosystems, and that's why they're parks.
Yeah, like Congaree National Park out in South Carolina.
You know about that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the very, very few remaining old growth forests on the East Coast.
But yeah, a lot of visitors that go there are like, oh, I was underwhelmed. It's like, it's not there to impress you. It's actually protected to, keep you from it and to preserve an ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's lots of record trees there. The second tallest pine tree on the East Coast, I think in the United States, is there, but it's the tallest of its distinct pine species, the loblolly pine tree.
Okay.
The tallest specimen is there at 168 feet tall.
I usually ask people, like, what's next? What's your next high point? But I want to know, what's your next trail? Do you want to be like a Triple Crown hiker, or do you want to do these state trails, or what's next?
I'm really trying to figure that out. When I got off trail, I was so singularly focused on, I'm going to go hike the Continental Divide Trail in this summer at all costs. I don't care what it does to my body. But that is a very easy trap to fall into, especially coming off the AT. I wouldn't say it's a trap, but it's a very easy mindset to get into because you had such a great time on the AT. You just want that experience to continue.
Yeah.
It kind of is unhealthy in a way to be so focused on that. So
sure.
I guess right now, I was working a job that was a seasonal position so that I could do that. But I've since left that job, and I'm currently looking for something in environmental consulting or field biology that I could have more of a career to it before I go hike my next trail. Because I thought I just wanted to hike my 20s away. I thought that's what I wanted to do, but it really isn't healthy. So for now, I'm kind of holding off. I don't know exactly what trail is next. Of the big, I would like to be a Triple Crown, like for sure. I want to hike the CDT and the PCT, but I think my body's still recovering from the AT, and so I think I'm gonna I'm definitely taking 2023 off. 2024, I don't know quite yet. It kind of depends on how much money I save up and where I'm at in a career. But it's either going to be the PCT, the CDT, or maybe, this is kind of a long shot, but maybe Te Araroa, which is a long trail through New Zealand.
Well, either way, you gotta update the listeners. So
yeah, of course,
that's really cool.
In the meantime, I'll do some shorter ones. There's the long trail in Vermont. The AT goes along it for 100 miles, but then there's another 180 miles left to do. So I'd like to do that whole trail. It's actually the inspiration of the AT. And it's really beautiful. It goes over a state high point as well, or at least near it, Mount Mansfield.
Mansfield. Okay. Yeah. Oh, that should be fun.
Yeah.
So I like to close out every interview by asking the guests, what are the benefits that high pointing has given you? And specifically for you, since you're a unique guest on the show, what are the benefits that through hiking the Appalachian Trail has given you?
Yeah. So high pointing has just taken me to a lot of different places. And as I'm sure many listeners know, there's lots of different subcultures all around the U.S. and they're all distinct and they all have their own flavor. And it's been quite interesting to go to these places and learn a little bit about what it's like to live in all of these different places across the country. And it kind of renews your appreciation for things you have at home and also gives you ideas on what other places might be doing better. As far as through hiking goes, it's like that, but to a much greater extent. You learn a lot about yourself out there. I learned I'm a people person. Like I was kind of, no, I'm going to go hike. I'm going to go do this by myself because nobody can keep up with me. I want to go do this trail and I don't want anybody holding me back. But I really learned that there are people who I like hiking with and I don't want to go ahead of them. And in some cases actually on trail, I don't want to fall behind them. There are hikers that were really strong. And so, I learned I'm a people person. I learned a lot more about compassion and working together and how, especially with the group dynamic, you don't want one person to be sitting there having a bad time. So, it's kind of up to everybody to lift someone up and support them if they're having a bad day, and for them to do the same with you if you're having a bad day. And then in general, the trail taught me a lot about determination and willpower and setting your mind to a goal and achieving it.
Oh, that's perfect. Sounds like it made you the perfect team player.
I like to think so. It definitely opened my eyes to a lot of new world views, and really, I think it helped me grow as a person and be more understanding. And really, I think one of the biggest things that I learned was that almost everybody is trying the best they can. There's room for improvement, sure, but given their current situation and everything that has happened to them in the past and where they are right now, they're doing the best they can. And as long as they're doing that, you have to be understanding and supportive of them so that they can grow.
You're such a unique guest, not only because of the accomplishments in the outdoors that you've achieved, but also the perspective that it's given you. It takes people a lifetime to learn that sometimes,
Yeah, I just hope it sticks with me.